Rebellion and Resistance. The Aden Emergency. The Aden Emergency, a critical event in the history of the British Empire's decolonization, took place in the Aden Protectorate, now part of Yemen, from 1963 to 1967. This conflict arose from the nationalist insurgency against British rule, primarily led by two rival nationalist factions: the National Liberation Front, the NLF, and the Front for the Liberation of Occupied South Yemen, FLOSY. The emergency marked the end of British colonial rule in South Arabia, and set the stage for the establishment of the People's Republic of South Yemen. The strategic importance of Aden, located at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, was immense due to its position along major maritime routes. The British had established a presence in Aden since 1839, initially as a coaling station. By the 20th century, Aden had grown in importance as a military base and commercial hub. However, the rise of Arab nationalism, and the influence of pan-Arabist ideologies, particularly those propagated by Egyptian President Jamal Abdel Nasser, fueled anti-colonial sentiments in the region. The Aden emergency officially began on December 10, 1963, when a grenade attack by nationalist insurgents targeted a gathering of British officials at Aden Airport, killing 2 people and injuring dozens. This attack marked the escalation of hostilities and the beginning of a concerted effort by nationalist groups to end British rule. The insurgency was characterized by guerrilla tactics, including bombings, assassinations, and ambushes. The British responded with a combination of military force, and attempts to implement political reforms, including efforts to grant more autonomy to local leaders. However, these measures were largely ineffective in quelling the nationalist fervor. The NLF and FLOSY emerged as the primary nationalist groups vying for control of South Yemen. The NLF, led by Katan Mohammed al-Shabi, adopted a Marxist-Leninist ideology and sought to mobilize the rural population. In contrast, FLOSY, initially supported by Egypt, comprised a broader coalition, including urban intellectuals and traditional tribal leaders. The rivalry between the NLF and FLOSY complicated the insurgency, as both groups not only fought against the British but also engaged in internecine conflict. This internal strife weakened the nationalist movement's overall effectiveness but did not prevent it from gaining ground. The British military response to the insurgency involved a combination of counter-insurgency operations, psychological warfare, and efforts to win the hearts and minds of the local population. British forces conducted operations to root out insurgents from urban areas and conducted patrols in the rugged hinterlands. One significant aspect of the British strategy was the use of special forces, including the Special Air Service, SAS, to carry out targeted operations against insurgent leaders and strongholds. These operations, though tactically successful, did not lead to a decisive victory. By the mid-1960s, it became evident that the British could not sustain their control over Aden. The escalating violence, combined with international pressure and changing domestic priorities, led to a re-evaluation of Britain's colonial commitments. The Labour government, led by Prime Minister Harold Wilson, decided to accelerate the process of decolonisation. In 1966, the British announced their intention to withdraw from Aden by 1968. This announcement emboldened the nationalist groups, who intensified their efforts to gain control. The withdrawal of British forces was marked by increasing violence, as the NLF and FLOSY vied for dominance in the post-colonial order. The British withdrawal from Aden was completed on November 30, 1967. The NLF emerged as the dominant force and proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of South Yemen. The departure of the British marked the end of over a century of colonial rule and the beginning of a new, albeit turbulent, chapter in Yemen's history. The Aden emergency had significant repercussions for the region. The newly established South Yemen adopted a socialist government, aligning itself with the Soviet bloc during the Cold War. The conflict also left a legacy of deep-seated animosity between different factions, contributing to the instability that has plagued Yemen in subsequent decades. The Aden emergency exemplifies the complex dynamics of decolonization in the 20th century. It underscores the interplay between nationalist aspirations, colonial policies, and international geopolitics. The conflict in Aden was not merely a struggle for independence but also a reflection of broader ideological battles and regional power struggles. The legacy of the Aden emergency continues to influence the political landscape of Yemen, illustrating the enduring impact of colonial history on contemporary conflicts. The 1963 South Vietnamese coup. A turning point in Vietnam's history. The 1963 South Vietnamese coup d'état was a significant event that marked a turning point in the Vietnam War and had far-reaching consequences for the political landscape of South Vietnam. This coup, which took place on November 1, 1963, resulted in the overthrow and assassination of President Ngo Dinh Diem. The coup was orchestrated by a group of South Vietnamese generals, led by General Duong Van Minh, with tacit approval and support from the United States. Ngo Dinh Diem became the president of South Vietnam in 1955, following the Geneva Accords that split Vietnam into North and South. Diem, a staunch anti-communist, was initially supported by the United States, which sought to establish a strong non-communist regime in South Vietnam to counter the influence of the communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh. However, Diem's authoritarian rule, nepotism, and persecution of political opponents and religious groups, particularly Buddhists, led to widespread discontent and instability within the country. The Buddhist crisis of 1963 was a major catalyst for the coup. The crisis began in May 1963 when the Diem government banned the display of Buddhist flags during Vesak, the birthday of Gautama Buddha. This led to protests by Buddhists, which were met with violent repression by the government. The most notable incident was the self-immolation of Thich Quang Duc, a Buddhist monk, in June 1963. This event garnered international attention, and intensified the pressure on the Diem regime. The coup was meticulously planned by a group of South Vietnamese generals who were disillusioned with Diem's leadership and alarmed by the growing instability. Key figures in the plot included General Duong Van Minh, General Tran Van Don, and Colonel Nguyen Van Thieu. The conspirators sought and received tacit approval from the United States, which had grown increasingly frustrated with Diem's refusal to implement political and military reforms. On the morning of November 1, 1963, the coup was launched. The rebels quickly gained control of key installations in Saigon, including the headquarters of the Joint General Staff and the Presidential Palace. Diem and his brother, Ngo Dinh Nhu, initially attempted to negotiate with the rebels but were eventually forced to flee the palace. They sought refuge in a Catholic church in Cho Lan, a suburb of Saigon. However, their location was soon discovered, and they were captured and executed on November 2, 1963. The assassination of Diem and Nhu marked the end of their 9-year rule and led to significant political upheaval in South Vietnam. General Duong Van Minh assumed leadership of a military junta that took control of the government. However, the coup did not bring stability to South Vietnam. Instead, it ushered in a period of political chaos, with a series of military and civilian governments rising and falling in quick succession. The United States, which had initially supported the coup in the hope of establishing a more stable and effective government, found itself increasingly entangled in the internal politics of South Vietnam. The political instability weakened the South Vietnamese government's ability to combat the communist Viet Cong insurgency, leading to an increased reliance on American military support. The 1963 coup had profound implications for the Vietnam War. The overthrow of Diem removed a significant, albeit flawed, anti-communist leader and created a power vacuum in South Vietnam. The ensuing political instability undermined the South Vietnamese government's efforts to fight the Viet Cong and contributed to the deteriorating security situation in the country. For the United States, the coup marked a turning point in its involvement in Vietnam. The Kennedy administration had hoped that the removal of Diem would lead to a more effective and popular government in South Vietnam. However, the opposite occurred, and the political turmoil convinced many American policymakers that a greater commitment of U.S. resources and troops would be necessary to prevent a communist takeover. President John F. Kennedy, who had initially supported a limited advisory role for U.S. forces in Vietnam, began to reconsider the American strategy in the region. After Kennedy's assassination in November 1963, his successor, President Lyndon B. Johnson, significantly escalated U.S. military involvement in Vietnam, leading to the deployment of combat troops and the initiation of large-scale military operations. The 1963 South Vietnamese coup d'état was a pivotal event that had lasting effects on the political and military trajectory of South Vietnam and the broader Vietnam War. The coup, driven by internal discontent and supported by the United States, resulted in the overthrow and assassination of President Ngo Dinh Diem. However, instead of bringing stability, the coup plunged South Vietnam into political chaos, weakening its ability to combat the communist insurgency and leading to deeper U.S. involvement in the conflict. The legacy of the 1963 coup underscores the complex interplay of domestic and international factors that shaped the course of the Vietnam War. The assassination of John F. Kennedy. a defining moment in American history. On November 22, 1963, the world was shocked by the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. This tragic event took place in Dallas, Texas, and has since become one of the most significant and widely debated moments in American history. The assassination not only marked the abrupt end of Kennedy's presidency but also left a lasting impact on the United States and the world. President John F. Kennedy was on a political trip to Texas, a state crucial for his re-election campaign in 1964. Accompanied by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, Texas Governor John Connally, and his wife Nellie, Kennedy was traveling in an open-top limousine through Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas. The motorcade route had been publicized, allowing thousands of enthusiastic citizens to line the streets and catch a glimpse of the charismatic president. At approximately 12:30 p.m., as the motorcade passed the Texas School Book Depository, 3 shots rang out. Kennedy was struck in the back and head, while Governor Connally was also seriously wounded. The limousine sped to Parkland Memorial Hospital, but despite the best efforts of medical personnel, President Kennedy was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. The nation was in shock and mourning, as the vibrant leader who had inspired so many with his vision and rhetoric was suddenly gone. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was 3 cars behind Kennedy in the motorcade, was quickly sworn in as the 36th President of the United States aboard Air Force One, with Jacqueline Kennedy by his side. The image of Johnson taking the oath of office, with a visibly distraught Jackie Kennedy still wearing her blood-stained pink suit, became an indelible symbol of the tragedy. In the hours following the assassination, law enforcement agencies launched an intensive manhunt. Lee Harvey Oswald, an employee of the Texas School Book Depository, was arrested in a nearby theater. Oswald, a former Marine with a history of political defection and dubious affiliations, was charged with the murder of President Kennedy. However, before he could stand trial, Oswald was fatally shot by nightclub owner Jack Ruby on November 24, 1963, in a dramatic incident broadcast live on national television. In response to the widespread demand for a thorough investigation, President Johnson established the Warren Commission, chaired by Chief Justice Earl Warren. The commission's mandate was to examine the circumstances surrounding Kennedy's assassination and determine whether Oswald acted alone or was part of a larger conspiracy. After months of meticulous investigation, the Warren Commission released its final report in September 1964. The commission concluded that Oswald had acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy and that there was no credible evidence of a conspiracy, either domestic or foreign. Despite the commission's findings, skepticism and conspiracy theories have persisted, fueled by perceived inconsistencies in the evidence and the involvement of various government agencies. One of the most significant pieces of evidence in the assassination investigation was the Zapruder film, a home movie recorded by Abraham Zapruder, a local dress manufacturer. The 26-second film captured the entire sequence of the assassination, providing a graphic and haunting visual record. The film was initially withheld from the public but was later released, becoming a crucial piece of evidence for researchers and conspiracy theorists alike. The Zapruder film's graphic depiction of the fatal headshot led to widespread debate over the trajectory of the bullets and the possibility of multiple shooters. The film's analysis has been central to various conspiracy theories, including those suggesting a second gunman on the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza. Despite the Warren Commission's conclusion, numerous conspiracy theories have emerged over the years, suggesting that Oswald did not act alone. These theories implicate a range of actors, including the Mafia, the CIA, anti-Castro Cuban exiles, and even elements within the US government. Books, documentaries, and films, such as Oliver Stone's JFK, have popularized these theories, keeping public interest and debate alive. One of the most persistent theories revolves around the magic bullet hypothesis, which posits that a single bullet caused multiple wounds to both Kennedy and Connally. Critics argue that the trajectory and nature of the wounds indicate the presence of additional shooters. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, established in the 1970s to re-examine the evidence, concluded that there was a high probability of a conspiracy, though it did not identify specific individuals or groups involved. The assassination of John F. Kennedy had profound and far-reaching effects on American society and politics. It marked the end of an era characterized by youthful optimism, and the beginning of a period of uncertainty and turbulence. The 1960s saw significant social and political upheaval, including the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and widespread anti-establishment sentiment. Kennedy's death also led to increased security measures for U.S. presidents, including the establishment of the Secret Service's protective detail and changes in presidential motorcade protocols. The assassination highlighted vulnerabilities in the U.S. political system, and underscored the need for comprehensive security measures. The assassination of John F. Kennedy remains a defining moment in American history, symbolizing the fragility of democratic leadership, and the enduring impact of national tragedy. While the Warren Commission's report provided an official account, the persistent doubts and conspiracy theories reflect the complexities and unanswered questions surrounding the event. As historians and researchers continue to explore the evidence, the legacy of Kennedy's assassination endures, reminding us of the profound and lasting consequences of that fateful day in Dallas. From democracy to dictatorship. The 1964 Brazilian coup d'état. The 1964 Brazilian coup d'état marked a significant turning point in Brazil's political history, resulting in the overthrow of President João Goulart and the establishment of a military dictatorship that lasted until 1985. The origins of the 1964 coup lie in the complex socio-political landscape of Brazil in the early 1960s. President João Goulart, known for his leftist leanings and support for labor unions, assumed office in 1961 following the resignation of President Jânio Quadros. Goulart's policies, which included land reform and the nationalization of oil refineries, were perceived as threats by Brazil's conservative elites, the military, and foreign interests, particularly the United States, which was wary of communist influence in Latin America during the Cold War. Goulart's presidency was marked by economic instability, with inflation rates soaring and the economy stagnating. His efforts to implement social reforms and redistribute wealth further alienated the business community and the military, who viewed his policies as radical and potentially destabilizing. The coup was meticulously planned and executed by the Brazilian military, with support from various civilian sectors. On March 31, 1964, General Olímpio Mourão Filho led his troops from the state of Minas Gerais towards Rio de Janeiro, initiating the military's move against Goulart. As the military forces advanced, they encountered little resistance. Goulart, realizing the futility of armed confrontation, fled to Uruguay on April 1, effectively marking the end of his presidency. Key figures in the coup included General Humberto de Alencar Castelo Branco, who would later become the first president of the military regime, and General Costa e Silva, who played a crucial role in consolidating the military's power. The coup was also supported by various political factions, business leaders, and media outlets, which portrayed the military intervention as a necessary step to restore order and prevent a communist takeover. The immediate aftermath of the coup saw the suspension of constitutional guarantees and the implementation of repressive measures to quash any opposition. The military junta dissolved the National Congress, and political parties were banned. A series of institutional acts granted the military extraordinary powers, allowing it to govern by decree and suppress dissent. The military regime embarked on a program of economic stabilization and modernization, implementing neoliberal policies that favored foreign investment and industrialization. While these policies led to periods of economic growth, they also exacerbated social inequalities and suppressed labor movements. One of the most significant impacts of the coup was the establishment of a repressive state apparatus. The regime employed censorship, surveillance, and torture to silence critics and maintain control. Human rights abuses were rampant, with thousands of Brazilians imprisoned, tortured, or exiled for their political beliefs. The creation of the National Information Service, SNI, allowed the regime to monitor and intimidate dissidents effectively. Internationally, the coup received mixed reactions. The United States, under President Lyndon B. Johnson, quickly recognized the new military government and provided economic and military aid. This support was part of the broader U.S. strategy to counteract communist influence in Latin America, aligning with the objectives of the Alliance for Progress initiative. Domestically, the coup and subsequent military regime polarized Brazilian society. While some sectors, particularly the business community and conservative groups, supported the military's efforts to maintain stability and promote economic growth, others condemned the erosion of democratic institutions and the regime's human rights abuses. The repression of political freedoms and the absence of democratic processes led to the emergence of guerrilla movements and increased political activism among students and intellectuals. The military regime remained in power for over 2 decades, with a succession of military presidents who continued to implement authoritarian policies. However, by the late 1970s and early 1980s, economic challenges, internal dissent, and growing international pressure for democratization began to weaken the regime's grip on power. The process of redemocratization gained momentum with the Amnesty Law of 1979, which pardoned political prisoners and allowed exiled dissidents to return. The Direitos Já, Direct Elections Now, movement in the early 1980s mobilized millions of Brazilians to demand the return of direct presidential elections. The military eventually conceded to these demands, and in 1985, civilian rule was restored with the election of Tancredo Neves, marking the end of the military dictatorship. The 1964 Brazilian coup d'état was a pivotal event that reshaped Brazil's political landscape and left a lasting legacy on its society. The coup not only overthrew a democratically elected president but also ushered in a period of authoritarian rule characterized by economic modernization and political repression. The military regime's impact on Brazil's political institutions, economy, and human rights continues to be a subject of debate and reflection, highlighting the importance of safeguarding democratic principles and preventing the recurrence of authoritarianism. An intersection of ideology, crime, and politics. The Colombian conflict. The Colombian conflict, a multifaceted civil war that has spanned over 5 decades, has profoundly impacted the country's political, social, and economic landscape. The Colombian conflict traces its origins to the late 1940s and early 1950s, a period marked by intense political violence known as La Violencia. This era was characterized by brutal clashes between the liberal and conservative parties, leading to significant loss of life and widespread instability. The assassination of the popular liberal leader Jorge Eliezer Gaitan in 1948 further fueled the violence, plunging the country into chaos. In the wake of La Violencia, various left-wing guerrilla groups emerged, seeking to address the socio-economic inequalities and governmental corruption that plagued Colombia. The most prominent among these were the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, and the National Liberation Army, the ELN. Founded in 1964, FARC initially aimed to advocate for agrarian reform and protect rural communities from state repression. ELN, established in 1964 as well, drew inspiration from the Cuban Revolution and pursued a Marxist-Leninist ideology. The rise of drug trafficking in the 1980s added a new dimension to the conflict. Both FARC and ELN became heavily involved in the drug trade, using it as a means to finance their operations. This entanglement with narcotics not only escalated the violence but also attracted the attention of international actors, particularly the United States. The US provided military aid to the Colombian government under the banner of the War on Drugs, further intensifying the conflict. In response to the guerrilla threat, various right-wing paramilitary groups were formed, most notably the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, AUC. These groups, often supported by landowners and segments of the military, engaged in brutal campaigns against suspected guerrilla sympathizers. The AUC was notorious for its human rights abuses, including massacres, forced displacement, and extrajudicial killings. Over the years, numerous attempts have been made to negotiate peace. The most significant of these was the 2016 peace agreement between the Colombian government and FARC. This historic accord led to the demobilization of thousands of FARC fighters, and the establishment of a transitional justice system to address the crimes committed during the conflict. However, the implementation of the agreement has faced numerous challenges, including political opposition, continued violence from dissident FARC factions, and ongoing ELN activities. The Colombian conflict has had devastating social and economic consequences. It is estimated that over 220,000 people have died, with millions more displaced from their homes. The conflict has also exacerbated poverty and inequality, particularly in rural areas, and has hindered the country's economic development. The international community has played a significant role in Colombia's conflict. The United States, as mentioned, has been a key player through its military aid and anti-narcotics initiatives. Additionally, international organizations such as the United Nations have been involved in peacekeeping and humanitarian efforts. The UN Verification Mission in Colombia, for instance, has been instrumental in monitoring the implementation of the peace agreement. Today, Colombia continues to grapple with the legacy of its conflict. While the peace agreement with FARC represents a significant step forward, achieving lasting peace remains elusive. The government faces the ongoing challenge of integrating former combatants into society and addressing the root causes of the conflict, such as land inequality and political exclusion. Moreover, violence persists in many regions, fueled by drug trafficking and the activities of remaining guerrilla and paramilitary groups. The Colombian conflict is a complex and deeply entrenched issue that has shaped the country's history for over half a century. While significant progress has been made towards peace, much work remains to be done. The path to a peaceful and prosperous Colombia lies in addressing the underlying social and economic inequalities, ensuring justice for the victims of the conflict, and fostering a culture of dialogue and reconciliation. Only through sustained and comprehensive efforts can Colombia hope to overcome its tumultuous past and build a brighter future for all its citizens. The Road to Independence. The Zimbabwe War of Liberation. The Rhodesian Bush War, also known as the Second Chimurenga or the Zimbabwe War of Liberation, was a protracted conflict that took place from July 1964 to December 1979 in the unrecognized state of Rhodesia, modern-day Zimbabwe. The war was fought between the white minority government of Rhodesia, led by Prime Minister Ian Smith, and two main African nationalist guerrilla groups, the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, and the Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZAPU. The conflict was rooted in the racial and economic inequalities imposed by the colonial regime, and it culminated in the eventual independence of Zimbabwe. The roots of the Rhodesian Bush War lay in the historical context of British colonialism in southern Africa. The establishment of Rhodesia by Cecil Rhodes and the British South Africa Company in the late 19th century laid the groundwork for a racially segregated society. The Land Apportionment Act of 1930 further entrenched this segregation by allocating the majority of arable land to the white minority, leaving the black majority with the less fertile lands. The economic and social disparities between the races created significant tensions, which were exacerbated by the rise of African nationalism in the mid-20th century. Two main nationalist movements emerged to challenge white minority rule: ZANU, led by Robert Mugabe, and ZAPU, led by Joshua Nkomo. Both movements sought to overthrow the Rhodesian government and achieve majority rule, but they were ideologically and strategically different. ZANU, with its military wing, the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army, ZANLA, was influenced by Marxist-Leninist principles and received support from China. ZAPU, with its military wing, the Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army, ZIPRA, was aligned with Soviet-style socialism, and received support from the USSR and its allies. The war officially began in 1964 with the first major guerrilla incursions into Rhodesia. These early attacks were characterized by ambushes, sabotage, and raids on government installations. The Rhodesian government responded with a combination of military force and legislative measures aimed at suppressing nationalist activities. The Unilateral Declaration of Independence, or UDI, in 1965, whereby Rhodesia declared itself independent from Britain, further isolated the regime internationally, and intensified the conflict. The Rhodesian Bush War can be divided into three main phases. 1. Early phase, 1964 to 1972. This period saw the initial guerrilla activities by ZANLA and ZIPRA, as well as the Rhodesian government's counter-insurgency efforts. The early phase was marked by limited engagement, with guerrilla fighters primarily targeting rural areas to gain support from the local population. The Rhodesian Security Forces, the RSF, focused on protecting key infrastructure and conducting search and destroy missions. 2. Escalation, 1972 to 1979. The war escalated significantly after 1972, with both ZANLA and ZIPRA increasing their operations. ZANLA adopted Maoist guerrilla tactics, emphasizing the mobilization of the peasantry, establishing liberated zones. ZIPRA, on the other hand, focused on conventional military training and cross-border operations from bases in Zambia and Botswana. The Rhodesian government implemented the Protected Villages program, forcibly relocating rural populations to control guerrilla influence, but this strategy often backfired, increasing support for the nationalists. 3. Final phase, 1976 to 1979. The final phase of the war saw intensified international pressure on the Rhodesian government, particularly from neighboring African states and the international community. The war reached a stalemate, with neither side able to secure a decisive victory. Diplomatic efforts, such as the Geneva Conference in 1976 and the subsequent negotiations at Lancaster House in 1979, paved the way for a political settlement. External actors played a significant role in the Rhodesian Bush War. The Frontline States, a coalition of African countries led by Zambia, Tanzania, and Mozambique, provided crucial support to the guerrilla movements. They offered safe havens, training facilities, and logistical assistance to ZANLA and ZIPRA. The Soviet Union, China, and other communist states also supplied arms and training to the nationalists, while Western countries, including the United States and Britain, imposed economic sanctions on the Rhodesian regime. The war came to an end with the Lancaster House Agreement in December 1979. The agreement, brokered by the British government, established a ceasefire and set the stage for democratic elections. The elections, held in February 1980, resulted in a decisive victory for Robert Mugabe's ZANU party. Zimbabwe officially gained independence on April 18, 1980, with Mugabe becoming the country's first prime minister. The Rhodesian Bush War had profound consequences for Zimbabwe and the wider region. The conflict resulted in significant loss of life, with estimates ranging from 20,000 to 30,000 deaths, mostly among the black population. The war also caused extensive economic damage and displacement of people. The legacy of the war is complex. On one hand, it led to the end of white minority rule and the establishment of a majority government in Zimbabwe. On the other hand, the post-independence period was marked by political violence, economic challenges, and human rights abuses under Mugabe's leadership. The war also left a lasting impact on the regional dynamics of Southern Africa, influencing subsequent liberation struggles in Namibia and South Africa. The Rhodesian Bush War was a pivotal conflict in the history of Southern Africa. It was a struggle for liberation and self-determination against a backdrop of racial oppression and colonial exploitation. While the war achieved its primary goal of ending white minority rule, the subsequent challenges faced by Zimbabwe highlight the complexities of post-colonial nation building. The war's legacy continues to shape the political, social, and economic landscape of Zimbabwe and the region to this day. In the next chapter, we will cover the Soviet Union's Vorskut program, as well as NASA's Project Gemini, and US involvement in Vietnam intensifies with the Gulf of Tonkin incident.